I think what I'm most proud of is that I backed myself. I think you can point to revenue or you can point to outcomes for clients, but I think the hardest thing as a founder is to say, I'm ready. But then one day I was approached by Amazon to move over to Seattle with my 1-year-old and my husband, and I took on a challenge to join their legal team.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Del Brolo, the founder of We Are Emerson. What if the secret to sustainable growth wasn't about chasing every lead, but about achieving such deep clarity on your client fit that you create a powerful flywheel, one that brings your perfect clients to you? In this episode of the Female Founders Playbook, I chat with Carly Martin, founder of Venture Bench. After a career in top-tier law and spending 8 years helping Amazon expand into new countries, she has built a remarkable high-growth business in under a year by defining a razor-sharp client profile and building a referral-based flywheel that runs on authenticity.
So Venture Bench was really built out of a problem that I'd seen that needed solving, which was essentially that you don't necessarily need someone with my expertise all the time. And the hiring model for my sort of expertise, which is new country expansion or just building really hard things, isn't something you necessarily need as a full-time role. And even in a really large company like Amazon, I tried to talk myself out of a job to be like, you don't need me for every business line all the time. So what if there was a way to create that expertise on tap? It's not quite a law firm or a consulting firm. It's not quite a flexible ALSP or alternative service provider. You're not a contractor. You're someone that's engaged because of your expertise to support on something hard. So that could be fundraising or expanding overseas or helping that new phase of growth. And you need someone with a really deep cross-functional lens that doesn't necessarily fit into a particular job description. And you just need that person to trust pretty much urgently. And so that was basically the reason why I created it. And what I found is that there are so many business owners at various phases of growth, but particularly that later seed, Series A and Series B phase, where there's so much change and you need someone who can kind of sit alongside you and be your co-pilot and help point out different ways that you can solve hard problems while keeping that really strong operational lens on what matters and prioritization and trying to do things efficiently. As a lawyer, I didn't come from a family who had any lawyers or any kind of professional background from that perspective. And so I didn't really have a lot of role models in this area, but I knew that being a lawyer sounded hard and I love hard problems or complex things that I can sink my teeth into. So I spent 10 years in top tier law firms, Magic Circle law firms. I was primarily a corporate and fundraising lawyer. And during the GFC, I also did a stint in Perth as a mining lawyer, helping companies list and raise capital. So I've had lots of different phases in my formal legal background. But then one day I was approached by Amazon to move over to Seattle with my 1-year-old and my husband, and I took on a challenge to join their legal team. And then from there, I spent 8 years, 2 different cities, and supporting new country expansion, disruptive business models, and then eventually admitting that I was no longer just the lawyer, and moved over into the business where I was developing the playbooks, the go-to-market plan, and helping teams think cross-functionally to solve hard things, get the approvals you need, and anticipate red flags and blockers. I started out as a lawyer. I didn't come from a family. Just about at the 12-month mark. Most companies fail in their first year, and I've got a husband in finance, so he likes to remind me of that. I had a high bar, but I think learning how to build businesses for Amazon is a great framework for starting your own business. And given you need to really be all hands at all things and be able to solve things that might be outside of your normal day-to-day, I'm pretty good at being scrappy and leaning on my network and asking smart questions. And most things can be solved. You just need to, focus on the stuff that matters and then find great people to support you.
Yeah, definitely. And so I was going to say, in the early stages of Venture Bench, what were some of the biggest initial challenges? But I guess over the past 11 months, what were the biggest challenges that you faced, and
Yeah.
how have you overcome them?
Well, the core focus originally was really about being lean. I believe in this tenet that like until you land on the core business model that's going to be your successful one, you need to allow time for test and learn
Mm,
and exploration. You don't want to invest too much in areas that might not pay off. So my first goal was just to earn enough money to pay myself and pay our mortgage. And then and then I was really aimed to focus on the customer. So like, what is the problem I'm trying to trying to
mm,
solve, and like, how do I differentiate them from other things that are out there? And so I knew I wasn't a law firm, not a traditional law firm. I'm not aiming to be deep in every single area, and I'm not delivering a product that a company then takes on to implement. I see it as strategy plus execution. And so I started exploring other businesses and different functions that do something similar. So I realized I wasn't a law firm. I was process of elimination. I wasn't an alternative legal service provider. And I didn't want to deliver a traditional consulting firm either, because like I index high on ownership. I can't just like deliver something and let someone go and
yeah,
flail. I really love that hand holding co-pilot mentality, so that you can be that guiding hand to help them do something really big. So with that in mind, I discovered the word fractional, which I didn't know existed either. And I really liked the sliding scope model that could be everything from, being an advisory board member to providing full-time support. And I love that flexibility in terms of, one week you might be working for 10 clients on like a pretty light touch basis, but guiding them at key moments. And then other weeks you might be all in on one. And so that was really that first phase, is being able to provide enough flexibility for myself to do things that I was really interested in, but also create that scope for later on. And then the next key question was, what happens when you run out of time? So everything I do is tech enabled and super efficient and all those things, but there's still a limit to what I can do with my own time and capacity. So then the next phase was really about building out a network for how do I bring others into the fold and then create a shared services model, because I love collaborating with, CTOs and CPOs or chief growth officers or investment experts. And I never wanted it just to be one function. I wanted to be able to pull in people who have expertise that I don't have, or go deeper in different areas. And that's exactly how I would solve the problem at Amazon. I'd spent a lot of time building networks and understanding everyone's superpowers. So how could I replicate what works so well in my old roles, but in an outside capacity? So that's really where the bench concept came from. And so I've been bringing on bench members to basically like co-lead projects with me so that we can deliver more, because then you add more capacity and you've then got different functions that you can kind of flex and move in to help businesses through different phases.
that's a really interesting concept, and we'll come back to that. So, going back to that clarity on client fit,
Yep.
would you say that is one of the things that has helped you move the needle in your business? I mean, you are on track within the first 12 months of your business to hit quite significant revenue, which is astounding
Hard.
and amazing for female founders. Like, I'm so excited about it, right? But would you say that's one of the things that moved the needle, and what else helped you get there?
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to figure out whether you're a commoditization service provider or if you're bespoke, special, complicated, expensive. You've got to know what you are. I think
Yeah.
when you try to do too many things at once, you dilute the offering and then you don't stand out. So I've never marketed myself as a like, come to me for every ESOP you ever like implement, and or like I just draft constitutions and shareholders agreements, or I just do company setups. There are great tools out there if you don't want to pay a lot of money. But what I think is unique is like there aren't many lawyers who have deep business backgrounds who can help you build the plan, figure out if it's the right plan first, and then build it scalably, efficiently with the right tools for the right job, and then help them through those moments that have real significant impact. Like when you're making a decision about which investor to go with, or if you're structuring relations between you and your founders, or if you're expanding overseas and trying to figure out the right model, you don't go to a low cost provider. You know that there is a lot at stake. So I think knowing what you are and what you're not allows you to focus on spending your time on the stuff that matters.
Did narrowing down practically look like? So was there specific criteria of who you wanted to work with, or was there a framework or an analytical approach that really helped you to define like your ideal client profile?
Well, I started with at what stage does a company start hiring outsiders? So like typically you got this co-founder team that is bootstrapping and figuring all the stuff. They're like all hands on deck. And so it's not that phase. I know that. And typically the next phase that I think is sort of much more in my niche is when you're preparing for that first big fundraise, because at that point you've got investors looking under the hood deeply and you don't want to burn those really great opportunities. And then you might end up after the fundraise with a non-exec director on your board. That is a natural moment for leveling up. You've then got the capital then to make smart choices, and you're on also sort of like a time limit on how long you have to deliver. And so during post fundraise, you're then on this sprint to make the most impactful decisions in a really short period of time. So for me, that was really my niche because it had a natural fit with what the companies were trying to solve for. And they feel the urgency to deliver, and they're feeling that level of like freak out, which I think many of us can relate to. And you can see how you can offer support in a very fragmented way, in the sense like you don't need to be full time. You just need to be the phone a friend. And then you can then provide that right guidance at the right time. So for me, it was sort of that Series A is the perfect time. But at the same time, I love post Series A too, because there's another moment there, which is when you really are leveling up your executive team, and everyone then is starting to go, wow, okay, this is a new level. And so I love supporting at that phase as well, because you then have these great people to bounce off and you amplify each other.
So you've pretty much productized legal and strategic support in your business.
That's the goal. Yeah. So like what I realized was like when you look back on the feedback you get in a big corporate, you kind of get a really good idea on what your superpowers are. And so when you hear that like feedback time and time again, like you're like, actually that is my niche, that is the thing I should focus on. When you can see connections between issues, you can bridge everything from strategy to ops to execution, and you are deeply curious about everyone else's functions, that's my niche. I love understanding each of those functions, and I used to sit with each of those teams and like just show up to the desk and be like, hey, I'm going to sit here today. And luckily I was allowed to, because then you get to understand all the pieces, which helped me in my day job to build out playbooks for those teams, because I was the like first mover, but also to understand what great looks like. And then you can then be the galvanizer of bringing in the right experts at the right time. When you can see where there's an opportunity to really hit a new target, you're not trying to throw away money, you're trying to strategically use resources that are going to move the needle. And I'll go back to legal, but applies equally to consulting. You know, there's plenty out there explaining that this hourly model is dead. And I believe that in many ways. It was funny when I first started talking to clients, they loved the day rate, which I also thought didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I'm like, what if you just signed a retainer and why does it have to be on a particular day? Why don't you just like email me when you need me, and then we just deliver a certain capacity percentage per month. Actually converting people to a retainer was harder. What I realized was like doing a day rate or an hourly rate in that initial phase actually built a lot of trust, because then they could see how much value they get in such a short period of time. So as much as I'm not a big fan of hourly or day rates generally, I think what it does is enable that trust, which is really hard in a high expertise area because people don't really know what you can do. Keeping people into that mindset, you have to take customers on a journey. So you might have to start with a business model that isn't your favorite because you can see where they need to get to, but you can't, you got to kind of lead them there without like forcing one model. And it just be really flexible, because I think building that trust then leads to all the referrals. But you can't just offer one piece. You've got to kind of test and play around with them so that you can then unlock that next level of client service. And then the other thing I found was like working a lot on big sort of transactional moments in a company's growth, like whether they're, raising equity equity or debt, or they're like growing in some big capacity. There's a lot of third-party stakeholders involved in that, whether that's like venture capital or family offices or debt providers. And once they see what you can do, then that leads to all these other opportunities, because, you want to develop a reputation where they're like, oh, Carly's in the business. That's a great company, because they know fundamentals are right. So I think there is, just like, you draw the analogy between, say, like privacy and trust. You want to develop a brand around like, you're the trusted advisor, you're going to keep a steady and I think that's something that, people should really focus on. You've got to think about the internal branding, but also the external branding, because it has flow-on effects for the businesses you serve.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you haven't marketed your business. So how have you got clients on board?
So everyone who knows me knows I talk a lot. I love people. I'm a deep extrovert. So I love events, I love conferences and all the stuff. And originally I thought, well, I'm just going to go to lots of events. I'm just going to meet people from there. And that definitely does work, but I think it goes back to the trust. Like, it takes a while to develop that deep trust. What I realized was I already had the network. And so it isn't necessarily the new companies that you need to go after. It's the law firm partners you worked with for many years who have been following your career and supporting you, behind the scenes. It's the former colleagues that are now working in PE firms or VC firms. Or it's like they're just really talented people that worked in different functional lead roles, whether it's product or tech or sales or content. And they end up being your like galvanizers. They're the ones that like, they're in big corporate roles or something and they can't do this stuff themselves. So they're actually just really excited to refer it on to someone that they know is going to be looked after. So I think just always thinking about how you can return the favor and also add value to people, because like they can tell when you're being authentic. You don't need to fake it if you genuinely really love what you're doing and you just want to solve a hard problem for them.
Yeah. And so how much of your new clients would actually come from, I guess, this referral engine that you've built?
I think the original client set was very much like referral based, like from that network. But I think the new phase is really around LinkedIn. I had a lovely call this morning with a guy in Vancouver who saw my LinkedIn content and was like, oh, she sounds really interesting, I want to talk to her. And what I'm finding now is that because I invest in content that aims to help people, you find other similar personalities who are purpose driven who also want to collaborate with you. So I think LinkedIn's a great forum for finding smart people doing cool things, but also to connect with others that could end up being your business partners, or like you can refer work to them and they're then thinking about you, or those sorts of things. So,
I guess through providing that valuable content, and then you've got this referral engine that you've built, and you have essentially created like a really strong flywheel model for your business growth. So it gains momentum, and sort of the faster it spins, the more value you offer and the more clients
Exactly.
are happy, they refer, and it's this circular thing. So you have essentially
Yeah,
created.
and I think also like if you were just to, take a normal sort of marketing plan and figure out how you'd build it, you'd start by figuring out who you want to target and being really crisp on that. And then you'd focus on where are they? What are they doing? What are those moments that they're interested in? And then you build a content marketing plan that's focused on serving them. And, I've been being quite intentional about focusing on APAC, particularly Australia, because I think you can very quickly dilute your message if you try to be global too soon.
Yeah.
But I definitely see opportunities to then take that to other territories and then do the same thing again. The thing that works, keep repeating it, collaborating with people who are influential in different areas that you're also really passionate about. It works really well for both of you. So those opportunities are out there when you think, you can trial something like an incubator in Australia and then take that to new heights, just as you would with any kind of business growth.
Did you intentionally set out to create that type of a flywheel model, or did you expect that a lot of your new clients would come, you'd create this referral engine? Was it intentional, or was that something that you discovered along the way and then decided to build that out?
I think it was intentional. I mean, I came from an M&A background where, big corporate law firms, you focus a lot on like your investment bankers who are going to refer work to you. You're looking at like particular types of investors, and you are constantly reading the news to then figure out what's happening in the industries that matter to them. So I think I've always kind of learned how that works applied to a particular use case. But in my scenario, I added these layers of like things that I'm not. And so that allowed me to kind of really focus on that differentiation factor. And so even like this week, we launched a new group for primarily lawyers who aren't law firms and not in-house, because a lot of the big networking and collaboration groups and information and training sessions out there, they mandate that you're not the other. And so it's really hard in this in-between space to find your people. So just through a conversation with another fabulous lawyer, we just decided to do it. So I think those sorts of things, like we launched it 2 days ago. I think we've got like 40 members in one day.
Wow.
And you never know where that's going to go. I think when you've got like a clear purpose in mind that you want to go help people, it really does come off that you're intentionally doing something good, and let's help each other. You're not trying to monetize it. You're just trying to create. You're trying to lift all boats. And I think whenever you're looking at a new business model, first you've got to create the category and an awareness that that thing is useful and interesting, and like, why should I care? And then the second piece is like creating value out of it, and like and for customers to understand that it's worth paying for. So it's always been that strategy when I think about launching businesses. You need to know which land you're playing in. Is this an established category, or is this a brand new one? In which case there's more work to be done in the brand new one, because I've got to build awareness first before I generate revenue out of that value.
Yep. And, I would say that Amazon would use the flywheel model, probably one of the most well-known companies that would be a core concept, that, that flywheel model that they would use as well.
Amazon flywheel is like, legendary. And primarily very connected to everything that I would do, because like I would always think with that flywheel model, because what you launch P0, there's going to be follow-on. So how can I always be more proactive and think about the things that will follow, and how can I make it easier for the teams that follow us? So I think when you think about it like a whole picture, you're not just thinking about the next 3 months or 12 months of the thing you're trying to solve for. You're thinking, well, there is a likelihood these other things will follow. How do I make sure that my structure is set up to support that? How do I make sure I've got the right people who could support it resourcing wise? What does my tech look like? You've got to kind of figure out how your building blocks are going to scale with you. So I started very early thinking from that mindset so that like what I have is going to scale with me as we grow.
Yeah. I always tell our founders, when, we get to the point where we're talking about, especially from a marketing perspective and having a sustainable growth engine, it's like flywheel model. Like forget the traditional sales funnels and everything like that. It is the flywheel model because it is an overall business strategy that they need to use. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah. And it always makes me smile because a lot of the businesses that I work with now post Amazon actually have their own flywheel that they've adapted for their business model. And when they teach that back to me as a contractor or an advisor, I'm like, this is great. Amazon flywheel is like, legendary. Because it is truly a winning strategy. And I think that's where I always go back to that like long-term view of business. That's something that Amazon holds very deeply. And so you're not just looking at that first 12 months to change marketplaces and to change like the way that people behave and what they want and what they need. You need to take a long-term view. So if you're doing something hard, it probably means there's value in it because no one else has done it before and you've got that opportunity to build a moat, but you've got to think about what they're going to need next and that next thing and how do I make sure that every step I take is towards that greater goal.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think and this is, something that I'm really interested in what you've done is the productized services. So do you think having the productized services and a really clear client fit has contributed to that referral engine that you've got? Does it actually make it easier for your network to understand what you do by productizing?
I do think so. I think I'm not the only one, and I didn't realize that this whole fractional community existed, but there are plenty of people trying to do the same thing. I think you've just got to recognize always that there's a difference in the productization depending on the application, and not just at a functional level like a CFO versus a lawyer, but also at an activity level. There's a difference between the work that you do as like BAU or keeping the lights on or constantly improving things versus the work you do during like key strategic moments. And you've just got to know what you are. And I think that goes down to that positioning piece and making sure you're going after clients at the right moment, at the right time. So all those things align. I don't think the productization on its own is the solution. It's like knowing how they all connect and why your product is the right one, and then deciding if there's one product or it's like an a la carte with a like small, medium, large or something like that. You're thinking from that, client perspective, what are the options they want and how do you best serve them?
Yeah. And over the past, almost 12 months of building Venture Bench, what are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think what I'm most proud of is that I backed myself. I think you can point to revenue or you can point to outcomes for clients, but I think the hardest thing as a founder is to say, I'm ready. Mm-hmm. And particularly when you come from like a very conscious career, like being a lawyer, we're trained very early on to spot risk and point out all the things that could go wrong. But I think that time at Amazon really taught me how to be entrepreneurial and how to back myself, because you're taught that making mistakes is okay. It's learning from them. And I think that very much aligns with everything you need from an entrepreneurial journey standpoint. And then realizing that you're not alone in the founder journey. Like there are so many people trying to solve things that are hard that you can build that like great network of support without hiring lots of people. Your support animal doesn't need to be an employee. It can be just other smart women or founders generally who are similarly minded. They have the same sort of values, and you can just help each other. And I think that economy of support and reciprocity really does pay off. Whether it's tomorrow or it's in like 10 years time, I believe in the value of networks and how that all supports each other.
100%. And I really like how you have, built Venture Bench staying really lean too.
The piece that worries me though, and this is less about venture bench but more about the industry, is it's a great time to be an expert, because
Yeah.
an expert plus tech, superpowers.
Yep.
It's not a great time to be a junior.
Yeah.
And so it's something burning on my mind. I'm talking to a couple of founders that are doing really cool things in that space. But I think we need to be mindful that as we build businesses that are super efficient and profitable, that's great. But how can we add layers that are going to have those community and society level outcomes that we want our, kids and their kids to be a part of? I think workplaces are going to need to change, solutions are going to need to change, education is going to need to change. So that's that other burning question, because even at a micro level, when I'm thinking, do I hire a junior to train up and, and sort of build them up? When you're in this phase of growth, you don't have the time and energy to give them what they need. So that's hard. I'm not saying it'll never happen. It's more, you've got to know how to be a great boss and leader, and know when you've got the time to invest in someone. And also think about how your organization could maybe tangentially support those goals, even if you can't do it immediately yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, especially in the early phases, as a founder, you've got these ambitious growth targets that you want to hit, and you're doing everything yourself, and you're trying to also fit in family life and your health and your well-being. And then, bootstrapping, and then the thought of having to bring someone in and train them, it can be a really daunting.
It can. But then I've also seen the flip side, because when you do get that level of like product market fit and you're starting to build a team, I really try to coach this as like a number one rule. You've got to know when to let go, and you've got to know when to invest in like new leaders that are going to be your layer, because you really can't hit that next level of scale until you trust and then until you scale. So those pieces are just so important. It's about, I think, getting your like spidey senses really crisp to know when that moment is for you, but not trying to own it all. You can't.
Yeah, you can't.
You've got to trust, and you've got to also hire people smarter than you in areas that you're not deep in. And that is actually an amazing part of being a business owner. So I can't wait for that layer. So in my mind, particularly for growth and scale up businesses, you actually need someone to be your counterpoint in a new function and to help tell you what the work is to be done and what to focus on. That is really valuable. Getting someone to do the work that you think they need to do when you're not the functional expert is not necessarily a winning strategy in my mind. So I try to explain that, because I think companies tend to only look at full-time employment options, and they're like, well, I can get a mid-level lawyer for 140K, but like general counsel is so expensive. Yeah, but they add tons of value. So what if you just grab them for 2 hours a week? They could set up an entire system for you that could run itself. That is a lot more value per year than one lawyer who doesn't know what to focus on or how to do it. So that's kind of that change in thinking that I'm really trying to galvanize with my clients, is like break down those assumptions about what work looks like and see if you can find a better solve where we'll create that together.
Carly, if there was, I guess, one or two pieces of pivotal advice that you could give to female founders that are sort of, just starting or going through a growth phase, what would it be? What would that be?
I found a fantastic accountant. I think that's really helpful. Learn the things you're not good at and know when to get extra help. Sure you're forecasting properly. I think that's really important, because you don't know how much you can pay yourself if you don't know what your costs are. So just like really basic things definitely help. And then I think like being really clear on boundaries. So particularly in my area of work, where like I'm used to a full ownership model and I will like give it all to help someone solve a hard problem. When you are delivering a fractional service, or you're in an advisory capacity, which in my mind sort of like even more hands off, you've got to know when to teach self-help and to know when not to just jump in and save them. It's a lot like parenting. But in a more nuanced way, you've got to know how to like teach boundaries and also help them be a mirror to them, to show them when there's like a sort of a repetitive situation happening, and just point it out so that they know what you can see, and then they can solve it. I think those key pieces are really important. The boundary setting, both professionally but also from a personal standpoint. Like, you build a business to have a life and to have a life you love. So you're choosing the work you want to do, and you're choosing something that's going to enable a great life for you and your family. So try not to give it all, but knowing when sometimes you need to flex that in order to get a great outcome. If there's anything I can offer, it's more just like back yourself, you can do it. You've got to have a plan, and you've got to kind of like fiercely prioritize.
And that brings us to the end of a deeply insightful conversation. But inspiration is only powerful when it's put into action. To help you bridge that gap, we've transformed the key strategies from this interview into an actionable playbook. It's a strategic blueprint designed to help you implement these ideas directly into your business. Visit the link in our show notes to download your playbook now.